Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 HR Virtual Event, the CHRO Blueprint for Navigating Disruption. My name is Deanna Caldera with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you all, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Workday for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Workday. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. You can follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, Human Resources HR Forum. I also want to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy, as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty today to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. We have a sampling of upcoming HR leadership forums that may be of interest to you. We'll be in New York City on September 6th, Toronto and Los Angeles in October, San Francisco in November, and Dallas in December. So if you're in the area, we would love to have you join us. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event into the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we have set time aside for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Evan Metter, Principal KPMG Advisory at KPMG. We are pleased to have Evan with us to deliver opening remarks. Welcome, Evan. Over to you.
Thanks very much. Hey, everybody. Happy with you today talking about such an important topic. Why don't we just jump right in? This is billed as the CHRO Blueprint for Navigating Disruption. And it really is a summary of what is on the mind of leaders in the HR function, and from our experience and our research, what we're seeing in the market, and share some insights with you. This is we're an evidence-based organization. So this is born out of our projects with our clients, as well as our research. We have a whole research arm. That's the KPMG Center of Expertise that looks into these, and happy to say we've just published our CEO study and are publishing soon our 21st year of our HR transformation study, and that's available to you, and I hope you check it out for more details. We'll jump right into the content, though. First, let's kind of set the stage. We're talking about workforce disruption, so I think a lot of us have lived through different iterations of the future of HR, and it's changing, and we go back, we talked about the role of the Ulrich model and when that came about, and if we move forward a little bit, there was shared services push and the outsourcing and then cloud technology, and these are some of the big waves, but there's something different going on now that's setting a certain context for the changes in the HR function. And one of them is this workforce disruption. So people are living longer. The research shows that 50% of children growing up today are going to live to 100. So what does that mean actually for the economy and the social safety net? It means that people are going to be in the workforce longer. We're already seeing this. I mean, people might have careers that are economically viable for 60, 70 years. That means that it's going to affect employment. It's going to affect the kinds of work people will do. It's going to affect the progression that goes on in organizations. And it's something that all societies and organizations are not thinking about. The next big piece in terms of what's happening in the workforce is around contingent and gig workers. So some people are familiar with the gig economy, and they think about Uber and those kinds of things when you can clock in and clock off, and it's not a full, steady, single employer type of work. What's amazing is how much this has grown. Many of you probably are already interacting with people in the gig economy. In some organizations, your contingent workforce might be a material, substantial part of your overall workforce. I just saw a study recently that talks about, good percentage of the jobs added in the EU in the last year are actually these gig economy jobs. This has a lot of implications for our society. It actually has a lot of implications for our businesses when we think about the right labor mix, peak periods. This is a big factor in retail, but other industries as well, dealing with peak periods, dealing with work that we can farm out. Do we really need a full-time employee for this kind of work? And it really changes the economics of the labor force. It also is making workforce planning a much more complicated science and art. The other big shift that's happening right now is around intelligent automation. You can't have a single conversation around what's shaping the workforce in any industry without talking about bots or intelligent automation or natural language processing. Any of these things are all really of the same stripe in terms of intelligent automation. Now, our studies have shown that 20 to 30% of tasks done now in almost every job category may be automated. There are websites you can go to that are cute and interesting around, will robots take my job? In some industries, manufacturing, they're worried about 70% of jobs ultimately going to automation. This is a real concern not only for the jobs that will be lost, but the new jobs that will be created and how we help our workforce transition to those new jobs. It's going to take a different set of skills, and it's going to demand on new types of skills being more and more important in terms of customer-facing skills, analytics skills, skills to actually get the output from the bots that we need, and that's going to change every industry. And finally is this consumer behavior. So we see the workforce expecting, I was a great quote I heard from a colleague, we can't be Jetsons at home and Flintstones at work. And the expectation that our workforce are having, rightly so, about what their experience should be like to work in our organizations needs to live up to their expectation around how easy it is to get stuff done in their personal lives, at home with Alexa or Siri or any of the other tools. So as we go in here, it really raises the question is, well, what's HR's role in this? And how is HR going to focus in the face of these disruptions to get competitive advantage? And that brings us really to these 6 points, which, my lived experience talking with CHROs and our research showed these 6 things are really what's on the top of mind for the top of the HR organization, thinking about how is HR transforming to meet these challenges and the disruptive challenges that are happening to our businesses. Number 1 is this idea of purpose and culture. It's a central part of every conversation that I've been having, and I think it's born of a few things. One, there's certainly a generational shift. People are looking for more meaning in work. We're at a historic unemployment right now, which means that apart from the rest of the value proposition, the total rewards, the pay and the benefits, we're seeing companies differentiate with giving their employees and their workforces other reasons to either, one, give more discretionary effort, or be there, just be there. People have a modern view of what it means. You want to work for an ethical business that is purposeful. You want to feel like you're contributing. And we're also seeing the lapses in some industries and some companies, and you only have to scan the paper for the latest unfortunate mishap of how damaging it can be to a company and to the employee brand and to even just the motivation and business strategy for a few bad actors to take a company off course in terms of culture and how important that is. So that's a big piece of what the conversation is. Second is a lot of CHROs are really interested in workforce insights and analytics. I have a few clients in the financial services industry who have made it their stated goal to be doing predictive and prescriptive analytics. To get through all the jargon, obviously we have analytics today that look backwards around diagnostic, descriptive, describing, well, what happened? But we are quickly getting to the point where that's not enough. And what we're interested in is, what do we think is going to happen? Or give me analytics that tell me if I do X, what is anticipated to happen as a result, either through productivity, through the labor cost model, any of these factors. This is what we mean by predictive and prescriptive analytics, and the appetite is there, and we're starting to see the green shoots pay off in terms of not just philosophy, but actual real life use cases, brought to life in organizations. This is not so future looking anymore. The third piece is what we're calling workforce shaping. So everyone on the phone is probably really familiar with workforce planning, which is something you say, well, how many people do I need and what kinds of people and where, in what locations? Workforce shaping is a much different, much more agile, much more constant version of this. It's really the next generation of workforce shaping. It's going to focus on, and the organization's already doing this. We're working with a number of healthcare companies, industrial manufacturing, financial services around really looking at skill sets. What types of skills do I need? Not necessarily jobs, but skills. What's the composition of the workforce? Who do I have in a gig work, contingent worker? Who's full-time? Where are they? What hours are they working? And then how to actually progress the workforce. Who are we acquiring and who are we shaping through learning and development? This is really a transformative piece where HR is much more engaged and involved in more than just a few times a year from a workforce planning perspective. This is constant. It's a constant tweaking and manipulation of the workforce, and it's going to be a big part of what HR is doing in the future. The fourth is the employee experience. So we talk about giving employees a great experience, whether that's through benefits or through onboarding. Maybe it's through giving managers a great experience through modern self-service tools. But what employee experience is really encompassing in great HR organizations now is looking at the end-to-end experience and making sure that what motivates people, not treating the workforce as a homogeneous single unit, but really thinking about the segmentation by geography, by age, by experience, by job, family, skill level. We're having that now that we're blessed with the technology to be able to customize the experience based on a number of factors and really give our workforce both a single, consistent experience, but also a differentiated experience. What I mean by consistent is that single pane of glass, not needing to go look at what number do I call for this or that, a very much more service-oriented approach, being easy to work for, but at the same time being differentiated in terms of not treating everyone as a one-size-fits-all with a lot of our programs and parts of the value proposition. This also extends to the physical temporary, so HR really taking a strong hand in the temporal, shaping what is it like to come to work, what space are you working in, how do you form high-performing teams, break down silos, the whole idea of OD and designing teams and mix of skills. This is something where I'm sure it's happening in a lot of your organizations. The focus really is on doing this more consistently and doing this more broadly within the HR function to serve the business. And then finally, of course, enabling technology. A lot of us are familiar with the great modern platforms that are out there, the cloud platforms. They're changing things. They're freeing us up to focus on what's really important. And we're not all trying to be HR software configuration and customization shops anymore. That's fantastic, but it's really extending beyond just the cloud technologies. There are questions around chatbots, questions around bringing in intelligent automation and bots to do everything from gatekeeping services to answering questions to automated reporting, really using technology in new ways beyond just our HRIS and best-of-breed applications. And then finally, what all this means for the actual HR operating model or the HR of the future. So questions around if we're changing the nature of what we're delivering through technology, what does it mean for the way we traditionally deliver things? What does it mean for the HR business partner? We all grew up with the all-work model, and we'll talk a little bit about that around preserving business intimacy, where we see HR organizations leveraging third parties in a different way, and really maintaining that idea of service, but providing it in new ways. To dig into a couple of these, just to give you guys some things to think about. Like I said before, enabling technology it's really more than just the HRMS. Obviously, we're seeing these HRMS systems extend to provide new levels of service and different services. So platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and this is very much connected to portal and knowledge management. So more and more, these great platforms, which we all understand the power of being on a platform and what that gives us in terms of consistency. We're starting to see this next generation of technology allow us to connect things, so we're able to bring in different sources of data and different actual features and technologies, but do it in a way that's giving our workforce a consistent experience and connecting the data so you're not going to your HRMS for this and then having to go to your other learning platform for that. Being able to do it in a single experience, which is really powerful, and it's a great way to actually get people to adopt these tools, because what's the point if they're not being adopted? The other kind of big piece is this digital analytics and cognitive and machine learning, right? So these are, right now, they're being implemented as kind of standalone technologies, right? So you have this bot or that bot, and it's all the rage. But very quickly, we're seeing these fold into not necessarily being different technologies, but being features or being part of a set. Some of the big platforms are adopting these as features. In other cases, HR organizations are pushing forward to adopt their own and create their own. But if your organization is not already dipping its toe in the water of intelligent automation, that might be a bot that does the work of a service center or does administrative work, generating offer letters. I mean, any number of things. There's hundreds of cases. Then you will be soon. Moving on past the technology, let's talking about the HR organization of the future and the operating model. We spoke a little bit about there's always that constant cost pressure on, well, and again, that's a big case for the bots, right? So what can we do? What labor can we move to robots? This is not a new story. We've been doing this for years in terms of efficiency tools, and Microsoft Office was a huge boost for HR efficiency, but we're seeing the next generation where we can answer employees and managers' questions with automated tools. We can serve up information to them that would have been served up by an HR generalist before. And it's really looking to get that insatiable, get more out of less of HR professionals. And I think a lot of the HR organizations are seeing this coming and embracing it and saying that the key part of our value chain is really focused in these three areas. One is this idea of workforce strategy and shaping, delivering the right workforce shape, the composition of that workforce, and the structure. That can be anything from the design of teams, organizational design, what skills we need, how do we acquire them and grow them. This workforce strategy and shaping, there are elements, of course, that HR is doing today. Not to say that there isn't, but doing it on a much more local, agile, constant type of cycle is an area where it's really going to make this much more part of the HR operating model than a feature of someone's role. The other is the workforce experience. It's absolutely done, it's thoughtfully done, but a lot of HR organizations are stepping back and saying, we really need to look at this holistically. We can't have this team managing the onboarding experience and this team managing the digital experience, really taking a fresh look at what is the full employee and even the candidate experience. And then the workforce delivery. There will always be consulting, research projects, program design that needs to be happening. And these are the three big buckets, and what we're working with our clients to do is moving from an Ulrich model that was extremely useful, but is slowly needing to be rethought in the age of new technology and new demands from the HR function. Just want to stay here on time. A few more things to share with you. Bring the future to life. And this is kind of on a page. How to start thinking about and taking advantage of the resources you have available to you, and how to start thinking about making these changes. So one is, how do you start building the case for change, right? We're looking at our HR model. This would be an area to benchmark, to look at what great organizations are doing. How are they wringing more value out? How are they bringing the costs of service delivery down? Looking at HR's role in that, and really making the case of, maybe it's a workforce case. Of we need the workforce of the future because our business strategy demands it. We're moving into more digital as a business. Those skills, we don't have enough of those skills in our business. And what HR's role is to make sure the business has the skills and the workforce it needs to achieve its business strategy. When we say the art of the possible, this is really about getting out there. There are great organizations who have already started. There are organizations that do research on this subject. It can show you what's working, what's been tried, and what didn't work. It's okay to be a fast follower. Not every organization is going to be a first adopter, but there's plenty of learnings already out there, whether that is moving to the cloud or moving to platform as a service or adopting the first round of robots for HR servicing. Use your resources. Designing the future state. This is really about contextualizing the points of view, thinking about what this could mean for us. Again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. If you think about how the HR operating model should change and what you should do, and I would link this with prioritizing and aligning your stakeholders, right? HR organizations are always going to have budgets. It's ultimately a cost center. Making the case back to the building a case for change and being deliberate and planful in terms of what you're going to spend, how are you going to start. A lot of HR organizations, it's hard to pick your bets, and everything seems like it's worthy of investment. But really start thinking about, what is the sequence and what do we need in terms of either the taxonomies or the skills or the way to think about our jobs and skills as an input to some of the more what I would say the more effective, kind of more transformative technologies or structural changes. And I'll just close off here by saying, leaving some questions. I know we have a Q&A later. I'm sure that people are going to ask really insightful and challenging questions. As we have these discussions with great organizations and with our clients, here's some things that we push them to think about, right? Thinking about, do we have the data and the ability to understand what the skills we have today in the organization and how they match the skills that our organization is going to need to avoid being disrupted and to be effective and to be competitive. Thinking about the culture. There are great aspects of cultures in lots of organizations, but how deep does that go? And what the effect is of people drifting from the organizational culture and how to get ahead of that. Having the right skills in HR. So we have some high-performing HR people on this call today. We're going to hear from them. But there are organizations, I think, that we need to be self-critical and to be looking at our HR organizations and thinking, who here is going to be the HR professional of the future, and how do we start building some of these new operating models around them? And finally, just how to adopt technology. What's the right pace? Where do we start? How do we start in a way that prevents us from getting locked into something or from making an investment that we have to do rework in the future? So these are some of the questions that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure you are too. And with that, I want to kind of turn the presentation back over to the next piece.
Perfect. Thank you, Evan, for that great presentation. So just as a reminder to all our listeners, please submit any questions that you have in the Q&A interface. And following the panel discussion, we have set time aside for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. We'll now kick off the panel discussion titled The CHRO Blueprint for Navigating Disruption. Today's panel will be moderated by Terry Walker, Vice President, Human Resources at McGraw-Hill Education. Welcome, Terry. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm Terry Walker. I lead Human Resources for the Higher Education Division at McGraw-Hill Education. I'm going to also ask my fellow panel members to introduce themselves as well before we jump into the panel discussion. So, Cassie, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Terry. My name is Cassie Brown, and I'm the Vice President of Human Resources at Discovery, Inc., formerly of Scripps Network, so recently acquired. And my focus is on employee relations and the employee experience. In my past lives at Scripps, that was acquired by Discovery. I did several implementations in the HR technology space and many different types of technologies. Happy to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Cassie. Justin?
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Justin Hall. I'm currently the Senior Vice President of Workforce Strategy and Analytics at SunTrust Bank, which is a large regional bank mainly in the southeast of the United States. And previously, I spent most of my career in management consulting with Bain & Company, so I come to HR with very much a kind of business and strategy perspective.
Thank you very much, Justin. And Evan was our presenter at the beginning of the call, but Evan, would you like to introduce yourself again to us?
Well, you just heard from me for 20 minutes. I'm Evan Metter. I'm a partner at KPMG, and my whole career has been focused on the HR function.
Thank you, Evan. And Phil from Workday. Phil?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. This is Phil Wilburn. I'm the Senior Director here at Workday. I lead up all of our succession planning and readiness activities, including leadership effectiveness, all of our leadership development work, manager effectiveness, and I've had a very interesting career. Prior to this, I was at the Center for Creative Leadership for a number of years doing executive education, and then prior to that, I worked in the U.S. intelligence community where I was kind of a network scientist tracking down bad guys around the world. So interesting way to find myself here in HR now.
Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks to all of you for your introductions. And now we'll move into the questions. And the first one is around challenges that HR executives are facing in this era of digital disruption. Cassie, I'll ask that you lead us off and share some of your insights here.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. So the first thing I would say is something that Evan touched on earlier, is that in our multi-generation workforce with all of these different types of employees and different demographics under one roof, we're going to continue to have disruption happen as the life expectancies rise. How are we going to leverage across those generations is an important question to answer, and some companies are doing reverse mentoring as a way to accommodate some of that. Employees want the availability and ability to work wherever they are and whatever time they want to, which is something that we're going to have to support with the technology that works well for our companies. And if we can't deliver the same type of user experience, which is something that Evan mentioned earlier, that everyone's become accustomed to on all their devices, then they're frustrated with our systems when they walk in the door. Our company and other companies, like Evan mentioned, are also looking at the end-to-end employee experience, all the way starting with the candidate, and are they able to apply for a job online easily on your portal, and then what happens with their experience as they're scheduling interviews and onboarding and orientation, and then on to how we do succession planning or rewards and recognition or development. And so if those things are all disparate and they don't work together very well, then our managers and our employees kind of throw their hands up in the air. So it's important that we leverage technology to help with those things, but make it a seamless type of experience. We've done that by starting with the employee experience in mind and then working backwards from that, and that's helped us kind of drive some of our decision-making on a technology front. Figuring out how to help drive the business with the leaders, using your business acumen to deliver what the business wants and to help drive successful outcomes will help.
Justin, do you have some thoughts that you can add here as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the interesting things for many of us who are on the call and who sit within the HR function is kind of summed up by that old commercial by Hair Club for Men, which said, "I'm not just the president of the hair club, I'm a client too." I think in that context, HR is in a similar place in that, not only are we expected to steer our companies through disruption, whether that's, digital disruption, evolution of the workforce and the workplace, but we simultaneously have to guide the HR function itself through disruption because, not only are we the HR function, we also are part of the business, right? And so HR function is impacted in the same way. And so as I focus on the first part of that challenge around helping steer our companies through change, I know one of the big topics we're dealing with here at SunTrust is the integration of AI and robotics into the workforce. And that in and of itself is an area that's rife with challenges. It requires determining what the right mix of automation versus employee labor is or gig labor is to deliver the best effectiveness and efficiency. But it also requires getting the right talent in the door to deploy and deliver those technologies, which is difficult given the labor shortages or the 0% unemployment in a lot of these areas around development and data scientists and so on. And then finally, it requires re-engineering business processes, hiring or developing the right employees who can plug into those changed processes while managing some of that fear in the workforce regarding potential displacement of people in their current roles. So that's kind of on that first side of some of the challenges that we face guiding the business. And then I would just close by saying on the HR side and how HR is being disrupted itself, we're at an inflection point, or you could argue we're already past the inflection point, beyond which HR has relied upon its expertise and its kind of soft skills, and we need to transition to looking at the hard skills and analytical skills within our HR teams to determine if we have the right capabilities in seat to really partner with the business in that analytical way, such that we can discuss the workforce trends with them, both internal and external, as well as the implication of those trends on their results.
So thank you very much. And Evan, I'm curious to hear if you have some additional thoughts that you could share with us on this question.
Well, it's hard because, like I said before, HR is managing a budget, right? And what we've seen over the last few years in a lot of organizations, I'm sure you guys have gone through this, is you go, okay, we're going to be more standard. We have too many variations. We need to standardize so we can operationalize, so that we can centralize, so that we can perform these services cheaper, right? And now all of a sudden we have this different force that's pulling us. It's saying, no. You actually don't need to be less standard, and we need to be more flexible, and we need to provide people with micro-segmentation and different experiences, and that's challenging to do without technology. And so, I think what I would say is, if you're an organization that's on the early part of this curve, it's still a good idea to get it together, standardize as much as you can, your job catalogs, your programs, your processes, and this is not new anymore. And again, get to the cloud, get to some of these enabling technologies for yourself to be able to pivot and adopt these technologies that give you the capabilities to ultimately then refocus and then go for the expansion. If we try to expand our level of service and the way that we're doing analytics and the differentiated experience without being able to successfully move and adopt the robotics, the cloud, the mobile, we are not going to be able to get there as an HR organization. So I would still say it's a get right and then expand kind of move that we see as being most successful.
Thank you. That's those are some good thoughts for us to take away with that particular point. I'd like to move on to another area that we were thinking about, and that's how is your organization optimizing the employee experience? I know that some of this is some of what you shared with us, Evan, but I'm curious, Phil, to hear from you about what some of the things are that are going on in your organization.
Yeah, no, thanks, Terry. And I think, Evan and the research there is spot on that we've certainly seen a trend towards a focus on employee experience. And, we're fortunate at Workday that Anil and Dave, our founders, really set Workday up with our kind of core values, our first core value being employees, because we believe in happy employees, happy customers. And so it's been really ingrained in what we're doing. And, we've had this massive growth, just to tell a little story around employee experience. We've had this massive growth growing at 30-40% over the last several years, and so much so that, 50% of our workforce was here at Workday less than 2 years. And so the big thing is, how do you maintain this amazing employee experience and culture while you're growing this much? We really came to this realization a couple years ago where we're starting to see a little bit of dilution in the culture as we are growing. And what we realized is that even though we were focusing on a lot of employee experiences from an HR perspective, we didn't have a clear indicator or measure of employee experience. And so we've been on a really amazing journey the last 2 years to put in what we call Best Workday Survey, which is a series of 34 questions, 2 different questions that are pulsed every Friday, which is called Feedback Friday. And that is a measure in which we can collect an ongoing sentiment of the employee experience, so then we can start to make clear decisions and understand where our employees are. And we've made that kind of transparent throughout the organization so that all of our people leaders, our managers, know what kind of impact or what employee experience their team is having on a bi-weekly basis. And then that data is even transparent all the way up through a dashboard in our technology, all the way through up to the executive rank, so we can have a real clear sense of where the employee experience is throughout the organization. And then that just helps us make more targeted interventions. And if you have a really good data structure, a metadata structure, that Justin was talking about, kind of the hard skills, you can really say, hey, this people leader and this team, one of the areas of focus, because they're getting feedback from their employees, is they need to work on getting clear communication. Well, our metadata structure is structured so that it automatically pulls a learning content module from learning that's personalized, very specific to them, and gives that to the manager so that the manager kind of knows what to do in real time, and that's completely automated. And so our journey of an employee experience it was always important at Workday, and we realized we needed to put in a system to monitor it and get a better perspective, and then connect it to all of the other data structures so we can take targeted actions around it. And we've seen a huge jump in the employee experience over the last 3 years, and we've seen put a lot of effort into it.
And so, Phil, can I just ask another question about that? So this is a survey that you do every week, did you say?
Yeah, every Feedback Friday, they get pulsed 2 questions. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
And so, you know, sorry to interrupt, Terry. It's a little bit different than like your annual or biannual engagement survey. What we saw, at least in our data, we've seen big variations from week to week in employee sentiment, and managers or people leaders get data that's more relevant and more actionable on an ongoing basis, as opposed to a year look back on engagement survey like, oh, hey, we should have done this differently this last year.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And Cassie, can you tell us what's going on at Discovery with regard to this particular question?
Yeah, I was just listening to Phil, and that's a very interesting approach, and I like how you aggregate all the data. At one point, several years ago, we didn't fully implement it because we had some changes in our org structure, but we had started doing the surveys for new hires, so we did it about the candidate experience, and then we did 90-day surveys with the new hire and the manager to kind of correlate that data, and we tied that all in with additional annual surveys as well as our biannual engagement survey. And we were able to start correlating some interesting data before we stopped doing it. But I think the more you can reach out to employees, as long as you're going to do something with it. A lot of the times with the annual engagement surveys, by the time you get anything, like you said, Phil, oh, we should have done this way 6 months ago, it's hard to affect any change. So I like what you're doing. That's very interesting. Most companies, start with the employee experience in mind, and what's the experience with the HR systems, the managers, how are we removing obstacles, removing time, touch, and costs always adds more efficiencies. What are we driving with our programs? So if you think about the multi-generations inside of our workforce, and you think about how long employees are staying in the new generations that are coming into the workforce, everybody's got a pension plan still, right? Nope, probably not. So we're having to create new benefit programs and platforms to account for how long people are going to be staying with us, which could be like 2 to 5 years or less, depending on what type of an industry you're in. How can we simplify and consolidate those things? Going back to what Evan said earlier, if you think about the whole life cycle and how employees are experiencing that, really taking a step back and saying, how can we make these be one thing rather than 6 different things, all the way from the candidate to the exit experience? What can we do to automate it and have the right touch? Because you can't get all the touch out of it, and you can't digitize everything. If you think about a new employee coming into the workforce, whether it's out of college or whether they're transferring and moving from a different location, what also can we do to connect them with the right people, either in the community or in the company, to make them feel like this is a place for them, both the area and where they're going to be working every day, because you want people to be comfortable and see other people like them and have a good air of diversity in your organization. So I think all of those things are very important in employee experience. Going back to, we're very corporate social responsibility now is a big part of what companies are having to ensure that they're doing in a good way, because employees care about that when they're coming. And across all areas of the business, starting to globalize that, if that's what we're having to do. I don't know if other companies, it depends on what area and market you're in, but that's a big component of what we're doing too, is how do we globalize a lot of things that we're working on so we don't have differences in the regions and how things look and feel too.
Thank you, Cassie. Anyone else on the panel like to share about some thoughts on the employee experience?
Well, I would just share, if I could just share one thing for those who haven't gotten their feet wet here. This is actually easy to start, right? And so if you're looking, don't be intimidated by this. It's really something that you should be starting with your HR colleagues and think about, who are the segments, what are the moments that matter in the employee life cycle, and starting to think about, a lot of what we talk about in the employee experience is where expectations don't match up to reality. It doesn't have to be some gold standard. I mean, of course, there are organizations that do it really, really well, but think about your workforce. Think about the major areas, the hot skills, the major segments, and what are the moments where their expectations are vastly different than what their lived experience is at your organization. That is a very good place to start. And if you start those conversations, I think you'll be happy where it goes.
And I would just add to that, I love that point, and I think that, a big buzzword around, especially as you talk multi-generational, leadership, is authenticity. And so it's a red flag for a candidate who joins an organization and they're experiencing something that's not in keeping with the employment brand that they were sold on, right? That's inauthentic, and you don't want that. So I love those points that were made, and I would just add to it that what I'm kind of curious to understand is how those moments that matter vary organization to organization, because I think it's easy to kind of go into this process by saying, oh, well, when somebody has a child, right, and they go on maternity or paternity or, family leave for that, like that's a moment that matters. Well, that's probably true, right, but there aren't universal, I think, company to company varies based on which moments that matter, based on your demographics and your workforce, based on, what programs you offer and so on. And so definitely reiterate the point of listen to your workforce, hear where those disconnects are, rather than kind of taking hey, let's read about some best practices around moments that matter and focusing on the same ones that everybody else, has.
If I can add to what Justin said, I think that, Justin, what you're saying, my sense is you need to know what really matters, which means you got to have the data. And so I think that's why having that data and some kind of metadata model connected to it. So our data is connected to everything else we have in our HR systems. And so that we know, for example, that at 18 months, there's a little bit of a dip in employee sentiment. And so that gives us here as HR professionals, we've actually created specific targeted programs for employees who have been here now at 18 months, and they've got to kind of get over their new hire halo effect. We also know from the data that when teams are smaller than 4, there's an impact on employee sentiment. We know that for different geographics. We know that for different ages. We know that for the different genders. We know all of those things, and that allows you to make those very targeted interventions because the data is providing that to you. So hopefully that was just kind of on the topic of what you were talking about there, Justin.
Exactly. Yep, great points.
Thank you. Thanks for all of those insights there. I'd like to ask Justin to share some of his thoughts about how your organization has overcome the challenges or taken advantage of opportunities around emerging technologies impacting HR.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm excited about this space, that is to say the HR space, because it is an area where there is a lot going on right now in terms of the evolution of the technology and the talent that is in HR. And so one challenge that comes along with that is just the sheer diversity and scale of those emerging opportunities. So if your HR function is organized into some of the traditional models that Evan had referenced when he was kicking us off, like whether it's an Ulrich model or shared services model with centers of excellence, each of those centers of excellence or each of your teams within HR is going to be looking at these exciting, shiny items in their space. So your talent acquisition team may be looking at things like AI-based sourcing tools and scheduling chatbots. Your employee experience team is looking at, pulsing or social listening platforms. Your comp and benefits team may be looking at, things like wearable technologies and how to connect those to benefit costs. And the list just goes on and on. And so I think it's easy to kind of get lost in all that swirl and end up making a lot of small bets that you don't put enough effort behind and kind of dilute the effect of. And so I think it's important to prioritize your efforts in a way that takes into account the potential return on investment as well as the overall alignment with your business's strategic initiatives. And so the way that we've approached this challenge is we've taken a path in HR strategic planning and investment planning that looks at 3 key viewpoints. So the first viewpoint is the overall company enterprise strategic goals and plans. The second is HR functions' current capability maturities and our desired improvement areas, which we assess on a COE by COE basis. And then finally, the third area that we take into account in our planning is an external market perspective of what's going on in the labor force and with our employee expectations. So that's one challenge is, how do you boil down this very large set of exciting things into those that are most relevant to your company's current levels of maturity and business readiness and needs? And the second topic that immediately comes to mind, and this is coming from the data and analytics guy, right, is data quality. So, and also this is, not dissimilar from what Phil was referencing around the metadata, where data quality is an easy area to pick at for a lot of HR teams. And I think sometimes we use that as a little bit of a crutch to say, oh, well, we can't go and do X or Y because the data is not good. We know that we don't have good termination reasons. We know that we don't have good, we don't, always trust the, tenure field or whatever in our HCM platform. And so that is a legitimate concern, certainly, because a lot of these new technologies are data-driven, and if you have a machine learning algorithm that's taking in your data, the output and the recommendations for that are only going to be as good as your input data. However, I also think it's important to acknowledge that the nature of the data that we deal with in HR is such that it's really hard to ever get to a perfect state. And so I'm a big fan of, get started with what you have, make the most of the data that you do have, while, making the appropriate kind of caveats and, kind of confidence intervals and whatever where you have concerns. But those are kind of two of the challenges that we've been facing is how do we use what we have without getting too bogged down on where it's not perfect, and how do we focus our efforts against those areas that are of the most potential strategic benefit to the bank.
Thanks, Justin. And I have to admit, I've sat in many of discussions within my own organization similar to what you talked about in terms of, being focused on the data and why the data may or may not be the best data to use. So thank you for reminding us of that. Evan, anything that you'd like to share with us on this point?
I would just quickly say this is an area where getting some external support, getting your full HR team, so what Justin's saying is, don't think about this by COE or by group, but doing something, you can make a lot of progress and unlock a lot of things together. What is going on in the market? There's so much in terms of what is steak versus what is sizzle. And really being able to look at that together and then prioritize. We did a workshop over the last 2 days with a group who did exactly that. And I think sometimes these problems, you can sit and admire them for months or quarters. But with the right group, you can actually make a lot of progress and get a lot of clarity and priority for your HR leadership team. And if you haven't done that recently, it might be time.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Evan. I'd like to move on to asking about aligning investments in HR with the strategic corporate objectives. And Cassie, I'll ask you to share some of your thoughts on what's happening at Discovery in this area.
As you might imagine, with any merger, especially one that can get large, there's lots of discussions about HR platforms and in general other IT and finance, and so there's lots of discussions going on and gathering requirements, but always starting with the end in mind about what it is you're trying to do and having your priorities and your guiding principles in place, I think, are important. There's a lot of companies who are going through changes right now, particularly in our industry. But figuring out what the corporate objectives are and how we can tie HR into those, because there's almost always a people component, is important, I think, as you're talking about guiding the strategic direction of what you're going to invest in this year, because it's always a trade-off. It's I can do this. Maybe I can't do it all right this second. And so having those discussions with the senior management team and the board, if you have one, are important. Reducing the cost and the manager time and effort is usually one of our guiding principles, and the user experience is what we always come back to. Can you affect something by implementing a new recruiting system? So if you want to reduce time to fill, then how can you do that, and what's the return on investment? We all know the CFO has a hard time swallowing the soft costs, but you can still talk about them and put them in your papers, and that you can remove anything. You can remove time, touch, and cost and simplify those processes. I think it's really important to your story with your company.
Thanks, Cassie. Phil, would you like to share with regard to the investments in HR and the corporate objectives?
Yeah, I mean, I like where, Cassie has put in a real a clear perspective on the trade-offs that you have to make, especially, there's a big investment in technology, and then how do you use this big investment while you're also trying to reduce the cost, time, and effort for managers. And maybe I just give you a kind of a case in point about how we're doing it here. Is like one of the big things, and it's a trend that Evan talked about, is this kind of intelligent automation. And we've gone down the path about trying to automate as much as possible. And so one thing I'm in charge of is succession planning and readiness. And so the traditional way, maybe from a non-digital mindset, is you run a report, you see who's missing, you write an email, or you talk to an HR business partner, you do a little bit of nagging, harassment, somebody fills out a form, you run a report, oh, it's kind of complete, right? And that's just a lot of effort both on the person who's managing it, the HR business partner, the manager, and so forth. And we've really, basically from kind of a digital mindset, we've automated almost our entire succession planning process. So, and it's kind of a funny story, Colin, our VP in technology in the CIO's office, he recently talked to my boss and he says, well, I just got the nicest note from Phil. He just reminded me that my succession plan is 6 months out of date and that I need to go in and fill it out. And Greg, as my boss, had to break it to him that it actually didn't come from me, that it was part of an automated system that we put together. And he was a little bit heartbroken because he's like, oh, I thought Phil really liked me and I thought he was a good guy who was looking out for me. But what it was is a highly individualized personal message at the right time that enabled Colin, who, by the way, went in and updated his succession plan, went in and did that. And it's completely automated. So now the succession planning process, anytime somebody shifts roles or somebody moves into a VP position, they get a piece of content, say, congratulations on your promotion. You've now moved into this position. Here's our philosophy around succession planning. Here's how you go about doing it, and talk to your people leader or manager about the best way to do it. Or if there's a position that somebody moves to a different part of the organization, there's a ready now leader, that will, in the system, automatically gets put to that person's manager, the positions manager, and says, hey, there's a ready now leader there. You should think about looking at the plan to see if this is the right time to, fill this there. And so all of this kind of, I would say, HR churn of emails and talking to our managers is all automated, which takes all of that kind of cost and cost through the time and energy out, and enables our HR organization to be much more strategic and much more focused. And by the way, we had to automate it once, and now that it's automated, it runs by itself, and we're doing that with every big parts of our HR organization.
Thank you very much. That is a great suggestion, and something that I would be curious to talk to you a little bit more about. So thank you. I'd like to now shift gears a little bit and talk about what are some key components and stakeholders that are needed to create a more agile workforce in your organization. And Evan, I'd like for you to maybe share what you're hearing and what you're suggesting to your clients with regard to those.
I appreciate it. And one of the things is your workforces are diverse. It's hard to take the workforce as a big chunk. So I think the first thing is we suggest you think about talent risk. You think about what are the key areas of talent. You can't take it all on. I mean, we haven't seen our clients do that. So how do you identify key talent risk? It's not necessarily just roles. And we have I'll share with you a very simple but effective way to kind of think about risk across talent as you're thinking about this. We call it the 5 C's, right? The first C is cost. What is the risk of the workforce becoming unaffordable? What will it cost to recruit people? And that's a big thing. So where do you have talent risk around cost? Capacity. Where do you have risks around your growth, around succession, around retention of key roles? Where do you have capacity risk? Capabilities. So this is where we get to kind of skills, and we can talk for days about taxonomies and competency frameworks and all of those pieces, but really thinking about where the business is going and where the key skill gaps are. Compliance, where is the key risk around risk relating to employee behavior, regulations, and laws. And then connections. Where is the risk of organizations' talent becoming disengaged? Where do we need talent to be able to share between units, the way, and come cut down across silos. So those are the 5 C's. You can use those, cost, capability, capacity, compliance, and connections. And these will guide you both in terms of where to look. I mean, clearly, your question around the key stakeholders, you got to involve the business. This is at HR supported. And sometimes the business is highly skeptical of it being an HR program. And I think this is a great area for HR to really partner with the business and decide what are the segments, what are the roles we have to create talent risk. And then the other piece is move away from thinking about jobs and think about what are the key skills. For an agile workforce, we're finding it more and more useful to think about the workforce in terms of leadership, behavioral, and technical competencies, and not just job descriptions and roles. And hopefully, these little, it's a big task, but with the 5 C's and thinking about skills and competencies versus jobs, it's a good place to start.
Thank you so much. And so I have one last question before we open it back up to the questions that have come in from the chat function. And that question is, what advice do you have for those who are just getting started? And Cassie, maybe you can lead us off with your thoughts here.
Sure. Most importantly is to understand your business and how work gets done, the strategies and measures that are in place for your company. I would encourage you to go out on sales calls and work the night shifts and sit with different areas of the business you lead for HR to understand the full picture of what they do on a day-to-day basis. In my career, I've had the opportunity to do this with different areas of our business, and I've really learned a lot, and I've actually recommended things to do differently to reduce their time, touch, and cost, which has been helpful for the overall business, not necessarily an HR-related thing you would think normally, but it's something that helped me and also helped the business. Knowing your stakeholders and what keeps them up at night, knowing if there's any sacred cows that you should stay away from. If you're coming into a company new, understanding the unwritten rules and making sure that you're sharing those rules with new employees that come into the organization as well. Find out what's working well and what isn't and help solve those business problems. Because when you do that, people really value you. We often say that if, no one cares when they walk into a room, when they turn on a light switch, no one cares how the light switch came on. All they care is that the light switch came on. So it's important for us to get the basics right, and then we're able to focus other areas of HR to help the business move forward. And I think that that's going to be important to any company's success as we move forward.
Thank you. And I'll just open it up to any of the other panelists that would like to weigh in on this question.
Hey, Terry, it's Phil. I have 3 simple things. Agree with Cassie, of course, knowing the business. But like the 3 things here is, based on the trends of where kind of HR is going, is number 1, you have to have data and it has to be accurate and clean. And I know we had a discussion about that, but that's it still remains really important, even the messy HR data that we have. 2, you have to have a clear metadata architecture about how all of your data fits with each other in order to enable any of those intelligent automations, any AI, any chatbots. You have to have that metadata architecture connected in your system. And then 3, you have to wear a digital hat. You have to be thinking like you're a technologist. How can I automate something that traditionally was done by, a couple of people? That way it just speeds up the entire HR transformation process.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of the panelists. Diana, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you to the panelists, and Terry, thank you for doing such an excellent job moderating. I think this has been a very fantastic conversation, but now we're just going to kind of review some of the questions that have been submitted by the audience during the discussion. The first question is specifically to you, Evan. Have you seen the new research indicating that candidates care less about company reputation and the company having a purpose? If so, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I appreciate the question. I haven't seen the research, and I would. It flies against my lived experience just as an employer. We do a lot of hiring across all different employee segments, and it's on a weekly basis. I'm talking to candidates. I haven't had a single conversation where the idea of purpose and culture hasn't come up. We were number 12 on the best places to work last year. That's a real attractor for people. They want to come to a place and work hard, but they want to have purpose. So I haven't seen the research, but it definitely flies in the face of my personal experience and what we're experiencing with our clients.
This is Justin. I've seen some references to a related topic, which is I think that the quote-unquote research several years ago, would say that millennials and newer generations, Z, et cetera, care more about purpose in the workplace, or that is one of the most critical things for them. The research that I've seen says that, yes, that's true. However, purpose and culture also matter for older generations, other generations. And so I would just say I encourage companies to, present that side of themselves to everybody, because I think all generations and, all good employees are thinking about something broader than themselves. So that's kind of the only thing I've seen related to that topic is actually, whereas purpose was once thought about as it only matters to a emerging segment, I would actually say it's important to a much broader population of employees and potential employees.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Evan and Justin. So moving on to the next question. This was specifically came up during Phil, your example of kind of the Feedback Fridays. So they were wondering if can you share an example of what a Feedback Friday question would be?
Yeah. So, one of the questions would be is my people leader provides the resources, equipment necessary for me to get my work done. Another example is I receive the kind of career opportunities for my own personal growth. And a lot of these questions are benchmarked to the Great Place to Work 54 questions. So Evan mentioned the best places to work list. We had partnered with the Great Place to Work so that we have almost like a reference sense, so that we know, using their research of 1 million data points that they have done, that these questions come from there, and that we can benchmark against them so that we can see, hey, there is this difference in our data. How does that compare to other companies and technology in the Bay Area? So we get a good sense about how we're creating an amazing employee experience, how that connects to other organizations also creating an amazing employee experience.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Phil. Moving on to the next question, and this is specifically for you, Justin. Can you elaborate a little more on the 3 prongs to the HR strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we instituted, I guess, last year in our annual strategic planning process for HR. And the 3 prongs, just to kind of recap them real quick, is one is the business's own strategies and goals. Another is HR's capability and maturity model, and the third is the external environment. So very briefly on each of those, the business's own strategies and goals, the way in which we take that into account is we have the HR business partners participate in the annual strat planning process, at the same table with the corporate strategy team and the business leaders and the finance team and so on, so that they can be a voice into HR to say, here are the strategic plays or initiatives within this line of business for next year. Let's translate that into what specific roles and capabilities they will need in their workforce, and then what can we in HR do to support them. So that's kind of number one, around the understanding the business's strategies and workforce implications. Number two, HR's capability models. So we started with some kind of industry capability models, listing the various things an HR function needs to deliver on a BAU basis, and we tailored that a little bit for our organization, and then we evaluated HR's existing maturity against each of those capabilities. So capability might be sourcing college talent within the talent acquisition area. So we would assess the maturity of that, and then we would kind of scan the maturity across all those capabilities to say, where are there deficiencies in capabilities that we believe are important to address this coming year? And then the third prong is the external market research, which we consume a lot of industry research from all the big consulting firms, system integrators, and so on. I follow a lot of influencers in the people analytics space, and so we bring those views in and discuss them with the HR senior leadership team to say, hey, here's a trend that's going on in the marketplace. Let's think about the relevance of that trend for SunTrust. And so through those three lenses, we kind of bring them together in a off-site session with the HR leadership team, to synthesize, where does the external environment, the internal needs, and our capability maturities kind of all intersect. And then we prioritize, based on what emerges from that, what are the gaps we want to close or the new things that we'll need to deliver for the coming year within HR.
Perfect. Thanks, Justin. I think we do have time for one more question. So I'm just going to open it up to the entire group. How does an HR professional stay ahead of a client who is on the cutting edge of technology? So does anyone want to weigh in on this question here?
This is Justin. I don't want to monopolize the time here, but I'm happy to hop in. So I think one thing is, first, if by client we are referring to the business, so we call them partners, and we treat them more as partners rather than somebody who kind of puts an order into HR. And in the spirit of that, I'd say the way to kind of stay ahead is, you don't need to stay ahead, you just need to stay in line, right? So I say, talk to the business, understand what they need, follow some of those external influencers and, trend reports to understand what's going on in HR. And then finally, consider how do you bring on talent within the HR organization who, can be aligned with the way the business thinks. And so, as I said, I came in with a consulting background. Our head of total rewards came from finance. Our chief HR officer came in from the wholesale banking or commercial banking line of business. So I think, there's an opportunity to make the HR team more diverse from a perspective of bringing in people who bring perspectives, outside of HR. And I think that'll help you kind of keep up with your partners in the business.
All right, perfect. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic virtual event. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.